You know, the story of the Neanderthals' disappearance is one of those great prehistoric mysteries. We've been captivated by it for more than a century, right? This dramatic story of a rival human species that just vanished right as our own ancestors started spreading across the globe. But what if that whole story, the one we all got in school about brutish cavemen being outsmarted by us, the sleek, modern humans, is almost completely wrong? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dig into the fascinating, misunderstood, and way more complex story of their final chapter. And it's a story that, it turns out, is just as much about us as it is about them. See, the latest evidence from genetics paints a picture that isn't about a simple violent takeover, not at all. It's more like a long, slow fade, and a surprisingly intimate fusion. And the biggest clues? They weren't found in some dusty cave. They were found inside our own DNA. So let's just start by challenging everything you think you know about how our closest human relatives disappeared from the Earth. Because in doing that, we're going to discover a piece of them that never really left at all.
Okay, so first, we have to talk about the classic story. For the longest time, it was the only story we had. And it's a really clean, logical narrative about evolutionary success, our success. It's a simple tale that puts us, Homo sapiens, right at the top as the inevitable winners of this long, competitive journey. And it was appealing, you know? It was straightforward, and it made us the undisputed champs. Now, to really get this, you have to respect just how incredibly resilient they were. We're talking 300,000 years. For that long, Neanderthals weren't just scraping by. They were thriving all across Europe and Asia. These were not the primitive cavemen of the cartoons. No way. They were master tool makers, crafting these incredibly sophisticated Mousterian spear points. They were true apex predators, hunting mammoths and woolly rhinos. And they had culture. They buried their dead, they made jewelry from eagle talons, all signs of complex, symbolic thinking.
And they put up with some of the absolute harshest conditions this planet has ever thrown at a human species. Think about it. They lived through multiple brutal ice ages, where huge parts of their world were just buried under massive sheets of ice. I mean, imagine a world where summer is just a brief visitor and winter can last for generations. For them, that was just normal.
And it wasn't just the cold. They withstood these cataclysmic natural disasters like massive volcano eruptions that would have literally plunged the world into darkness, blocking out the sun, killing off plants and the animals they depended on. And still, through all of that, they kept going. For a stretch of time that makes all of our recorded history look like a long weekend, they were the dominant human species in Eurasia.
So, the simple story goes like this. After all that, a new, smarter, more adaptable species, that's us, Homo sapiens, shows up from Africa around 45,000 years ago. And then, poof! Within just a few thousand years, which is a blink of an eye in geological time, the Neanderthals are gone. The conclusion just seemed obvious, right? We either outcompeted them for food with better tools and strategies, or we brought new diseases they couldn't fight off, or, in the darkest version of the story, we just wiped them out in a prehistoric genocide.
Yeah, but the evidence doesn't really fit that clean story. The archaeological record is, well, it's messy. In some places, Neanderthals seem to vanish long before a lot of modern humans even get there. But in other places, like parts of France and Spain, the two groups actually live side by side, coexisting for thousands of years. So it wasn't some kind of quick replacement. It was a long, complicated overlap. And this messy timeline points to a much more complex and, frankly, a much more interesting story, one that was hidden in their DNA.
So the first huge clue that just shattered that old story came in 2010. And this was an absolutely monumental achievement by the geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team. For years, people thought sequencing a full ancient genome was just impossible. DNA breaks down over time, it shatters into these tiny little pieces, gets contaminated. But these guys, through sheer persistence, they did the impossible. They sequenced the entire Neanderthal genome from 40,000-year-old bones, and it changed everything. The very first finding was a total bombshell. It just sent ripples through the entire scientific world. Modern humans and Neanderthals had kids together, and this wasn't some rare one-off thing. It happened enough that it left a permanent mark. So we didn't just compete with them. In a very real way, we absorbed them. That clear line between us and them, it suddenly got incredibly blurry. This number right here is just a stunning discovery. It means that if you have ancestry from outside of Africa, somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA is from Neanderthals. And it's not just sitting there, it's still active inside you today. It's influencing things like how your immune system responds to a virus, your risk for type 2 diabetes, how your body processes fats, even the texture of your hair and your skin. Their genetic code is a living, breathing part of billions of people.
But
That same genome that showed us this incredible connection also held a second, much darker secret. It was a clue that was hiding in plain sight. It was a story not about how they interacted with us, but about their own internal struggles. It contained the real reason the Neanderthals were already disappearing, a problem that had been building for thousands of years, long before we ever showed up.
Here's the crucial point. Their gene pool was dangerously small. Okay, think of it like a toolbox. A healthy, resilient species has this giant toolbox full of all sorts of different genetic tools to handle any problem. A new disease, a big climate shift. The Neanderthals, well, they had a very small, very limited toolbox, and a lot of the tools were just copies of each other. Their entire population was probably fewer than 100,000 people, scattered across whole continents in these small, isolated groups that almost never met.
And this genetic weakness, it wasn't some sudden thing that happened when we got there. Nope, it was the end result of a long, slow decline. They were caught in this invisible trap, a genetic spiral that was pulling them toward extinction for millennia. Our arrival wasn't the cause of their decline. It was really just the final act in a tragedy that had been playing out for a very, very long time.
So scientists actually have a name for this danger: mutational meltdown. What happens is, in small, inbred populations, harmful genetic glitches start to build up faster than natural selection can weed them out. So each generation becomes just a little bit less healthy, a little less fertile, and one genome from a cave in Siberia confirmed this in a really chilling way. It belonged to a woman whose parents were half-siblings. This wasn't some weird anomaly. This was a species in deep, deep trouble.
This chart really just says it all. It shows you exactly how precarious their situation was. On the left, you see that high bar? That's the genetic variation of a healthy, robust species, like our own ancestors. And then on the right, you see the Neanderthals, a bar that is just alarmingly low. The difference is stark. They weren't just a little less diverse, they were one of the least genetically diverse species ever studied. They were living right on a genetic knife's edge.
So what was driving all this? The crazy, unstable Ice Age climate. Let's just walk through this loop. First, you get a sudden climate shift. Glaciers advance or forests shrink. That then isolates these already tiny populations from each other, which cuts off the flow of new genes. That isolation leads to step 3. Inbreeding becomes basically unavoidable. And that, in turn, speeds up the final step. All those harmful mutations start to pile up. It was this self-reinforcing feedback loop of extinction. And we didn't create it, we just happened to show up at the very end of it.
But here's the thing. This is not just a story about decline, it's also a story of inheritance. And maybe the most surprising twist of all is that their genetic end in a really strange way actually helped our biological beginning as we spread out across the planet. Their final chapter became the prologue to a brand new chapter in our own story.
Interbreeding was like a double-edged sword. When their DNA entered our much larger, much more diverse gene pool, natural selection could finally do its job properly. See, in their small population, a harmful mutation might have been the only genetic option available. But in our huge gene pool, there were better alternatives. So individuals with those harmful Neanderthal genes were less likely to survive and have kids, and slowly, over generations, those genes got filtered out. But we kept the good stuff. We inherited genes that gave our immune systems a boost, getting us ready for European pathogens that our African ancestors had never seen before. We kept genes for thicker skin and hair, which were great adaptations for colder, less sunny climates. We basically got to download a survival toolkit that had been stress-tested and perfected over hundreds of thousands of years in Eurasia. For us newcomers, that was a critical advantage.
And this right here is why this new way of understanding Neanderthals matters so much. Their biological legacy didn't just disappear into the ice, it was preserved. It became a permanent, functioning part of the human lineage. They didn't just go extinct. In a way, they were assimilated. Their story isn't one of failure, but of a totally different kind of survival, one that's written into the code of our own species.
But even with all these incredible genetic breakthroughs, science still hasn't solved the whole puzzle. Like with any great discovery, sequencing the Neanderthal genome answered a lot of old questions, but it also opened up new, even more fascinating mysteries. The final pages of their story, they're still missing.
So here's the main puzzle. If they were already in this terminal genetic decline, this mutational meltdown, then how did these small, isolated groups in places like Gibraltar manage to survive for more than 10,000 years after most of the others were already gone? What was so different about these last holdouts? Did their unique coastal environment give them some kind of buffer that let them hang on for so long? Something kept them going, and we just don't know what it was yet.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really provocative thought that kind of reframes the whole idea of extinction. The Neanderthals, as a separate, distinct species, they're gone. We're never going to see them again. But their genes, their adaptations, their very biological essence, that lives on in billions of people walking the Earth today. So, did they really vanish, or did they just change their form, becoming a permanent part of a new hybrid humanity?